and then just give you a brief introduction. So we're very grateful to Matt Carter, CEO of Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, for joining us this morning. He's going to talk about the Trust's vision for Leicestershire and Rutland. So without further ado, thanks for joining us, Matt, and it's over to you.
Right. Do shout if anything goes wrong, because I can't see you whilst I'm sharing. So if anything happens, just shout out. First of all, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along. And really nice to see so many people on here. Yeah, as Alan said, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the threats to nature and how the Trust is responding. There's quite a bit of detail in some of the slides, so of course I'm happy to share any of those slides afterwards if anybody wants to look at that. So if you're not familiar with the Wildlife Trust, then our work is based around our nature reserves, but also land away from our sites, promoting conservation, as well as things like engagement, education, and support and advice that we hand out. The first thing I really want to say is just a big thank you to everybody who's in this recorder community. Absolutely underpins our work. It's essential for what we do. It's of great value. You do it voluntarily, and it's really appreciated. It's so important. So I start off just with the, are those slides changing over okay? Can everybody see the switch? Good, thank you. Start off with the State Nature Report, which was recently published. The quote in there that always sort of surprises and shocks, I think, is the UK is now one of the most nature depleted countries on earth. And when we look at that, usually when I talk to people, that's the moment of shock, which everybody sort of thinks really our state. And it sort of tells the picture of what the challenges we have going ahead. Of course, it's a huge document. If you haven't seen it, there are lots of details in it, but overall, it's sort of describing a general decline both in the abundance and in the distribution of species across the UK. And we've seen that trend continue. In the graph in the top left shows the sort of continuation of that trend as we go through. So it's not surprising, but it's slightly depressing when you look at this and see this trend continue onwards. There are some sort of key findings that I've drawn out. There's an awful lot of information in it. The first is that nature-friendly farming is important and can deliver for nature, but we need to see it being implemented at a much wider scale and more intensely across farmland. So there are sort of signs of hope, but we need a greater level of promotion. We only have, or very little of our land is actually protected, and by protected I mean sort of nature designations. And those which are, many of them aren't being managed well. So that protection system of SSSIs and SACs isn't working well for us across the whole country. There's more work to be done for that. But there is a positive in there, I think, in this report, is that targeting conservation can work. And that comes across, and you can see individual species which have really seen enhancements and improvements in the abundance and the geography where action is being taken place. So we know that the actions, when we do implement them well, actually can deliver. I wanted to cover a couple of national threats as well, which are sort of major scale and having a huge impact on nature. The first would be around climate change. And this is a real challenge, and we've seen the impact that climate change is having on nature and local populations. But there has been a weakening of a sort of commitment of government around actions to address climate change. So as I say there, we've recently seen Prime Minister deliver sort of a watering down, I would say, of some of the actions that we've proposed, such as phasing out of the petrol and diesel car ban, rules on energy efficiency being scrapped, measures to reduce plastic being removed, North Sea oil and gas exploration sort of reinvigorated and new sites being opened. And there the Trust, as a wildlife trust, we do a lot of lobbying on a national scale to really try to persuade governments, whoever that may be, to change their thinking around this and highlighting the importance of addressing climate change issues. The other one, which I thought was timely, was the nutrient neutrality. And this was all about the amount of nutrients or effluent sewage that we put into our rivers. And it's particularly prevalent on some areas where our watercourses are really sensitive to this. The little chart shows that you can see that species which are involved in nutrient recycling are doing really well at the moment. The water quality is benefit, or the poor water quality benefits some species, but overall we get a real loss of a majority of species in our watercourses, and some are really struggling. And this legislation was proposed to effectively tell competent authorities to ignore evidence and that they couldn't consider the impact on watercourses. It was blocked in the House of Lords following a huge amount of lobbying from wildlife trusts and a whole range of other environmental organisations. But the proposals are this will come back. It's seen as a blocker to development, but I think it's another area where you can see wildlife trusts really fighting to get political influence to make sure that consideration is taken of nature and measures around those. Of course, there are lots of other national challenges and issues, but I want to home in on a little bit about our local area. We're fortunate across Leicestershire and Rutland to have a real diversity of habitats, often driven by our geology, and you can see the range of acid, alkaline, neutral grasslands, as well as all the features that flow through, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But when you put this together, that diversity, it gives us a real diversity of sort of habitats, and you can see here that across the years we've been working in this area, we've developed what we call living landscapes, and these are areas where we sort of focus our activities around, and you can see those tend to be around Charnwood Forest, the geology and the woodlands, the Sorum Reek and the river corridors that flows through there, the chalklands of the Jurassic limestone and some really important grasslands, of course Rutland Water, and then Leafield Forest. So you can see the sort of patterns, and that also aligns to where our nature reserves are. So all our little numbers there are focusing around our nature reserves and what we're trying to deliver in those. So our target for the Worldlife Trust is, we'll hear the phrase 30 by 30, and this is to get 30% of land managed for nature by 2030. And it's a really ambitious target. 30% is a lot, and it gives you that feel in those two charts at the top, what 10% cover would look like in an area against 30%. 30% has been scientifically chosen. It's the area not only where you start to get connectivity between different nature conservation sites, it's also the point at which you start to get diminishing returns. So if you're going to pick a target, go for 30. More is obviously better, but you have to put more effort in for less return. So that felt sufficiently ambitious at this stage. And of course, it's really important on this target is where that 30% is and what it is. And that target applies not across just the landscapes we have, but also across our marine areas as well. And it's starting, I think, to get a bit of traction and started to be reflected in language that you hear decision makers, policy makers sort of commenting on as well. Of course, the other thing we really concentrate on when we're looking at promoting conservation is around the Laon Principles, which have been around for many years now, but still hold very true. And this is about making sure that our sites are bigger, better, and more connected to one another. And that's how we get the maximum benefit for nature conservation. So taking those, I wanted to just look at two sort of projects that the Wildlife Trust have been involved in that reflect these sort of ideas. The first is the Sorum Reek. And we have several bids and projects at the moment. We're looking around the river corridors. We're looking at trying to connect the sites we have on those river corridors to provide sort of networks for nature to move along. We've undertaken a scoping report on the River Reek to look for opportunities for future work, so where we can do more river restoration project. And if you look at our existing sites at the moment, or not just ours, but others as well, you can see how we start to look at this in a map-based way and join up our sites. So we get connectivity along the river corridors, and we can sort of join how nature can move, but also how people can see and enjoy nature. And that's our ambition, is to do more and more of this, recreating a natural functioning river corridor. Another really valuable, important scheme of which we're a partner of is around the Charnwood Forest landscape. And this is a really large scale led by the National Forest, but trying to pull together a range of organisations. And we're delivering part of this on their behalf as part of this project. And as part of that, we're looking at how we can improve grasslands in the area. And we're doing active management and monitoring to see how those grasslands improve. And I think a number of you here have probably been involved in that. And also doing training to give a legacy of more people who can be involved in measuring and monitoring wildlife on those sites. and increasing that capacity. So just two examples where we're working in those areas to try to sort of strengthen our delivery across what we're doing. What struck me when I came into the trust, when you map our sites on a map of the area, what stands out is we have some really valuable sites, but we're not going to achieve our 30 by 30. We're not going to ensure the continuation of nature simply by focusing on our own nature reserves. They're incredibly important sites. They're obvious. They're sometimes, you know, really valuable, high quality, and help to spread wildlife. But alone, they're not going to be sufficient to do what we want to do. And this map sort of epitomizes that there's an awful lot of areas which aren't urban, which are really important for conservation. And in that sense, we try to do a lot of influencing beyond our sites. And this is probably the most important initiative that we're involved in at the moment. This is the local nature recovery strategies. It's being led by Leicester County Council, and we're working closely with them to try to demonstrate the work we've done historically about where are important sites. The idea of these strategies are they will map important areas for nature, establish priorities, and come up with a strategy that will then become part of the statutory planning framework as well, which is really important, and where these schemes probably deviate from other historic initiatives. This will be based in legislation, so this will help. And by engaging in these sorts of projects, what we will look to do is not only identify where future nature recovery should be targeted, but also hopefully set a baseline for the whole of the area of the sort of minimum standards we want to see, so we get the greatest benefit out of nature. And as I say, these projects led by the County Council, it's fairly early stages, but over the next 12 months, they will be starting to deliver these strategies and consulting on these. And I think that'll be a really important way to make sure that we sort of influence the other activities that happen. So I was going to stop there. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions at the end, but hopefully I've kept you on time. And that's a quick whiz through. But if anybody wants to see more details of those slides, I'm really happy to share those later. I will come off my stop sharing and check that I haven't overrun.